At Hillcrest Psychiatric Institute, desperate single mother Lyra Thompson was about to uncover a devastating secret. What started as a simple night custodial job took a shocking turn when she discovered active medical equipment in supposedly abandoned wings. Lyra wasn't your typical janitor. For 3 years, she had used her incomplete nursing education to survive, known for her keen observational skills and unwavering determination to protect her daughter. When she found patient 47 alive in the restricted basement, she realized she was walking into a $180 million conspiracy involving illegal human experimentation that would transform her from struggling mother into unlikely whistleblower. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The eviction notice crumpled in Lyra Thompson's trembling hands as she stared at the impossible numbers. 30 days. That's all she had left before she and Sophia would be on the street. Again. Mama, are you okay? Sophia's voice carried the careful concern of a child who'd learned too early to read the weight in her mother's shoulders, the tightness around her eyes when bills arrived. Lyra smoothed the paper flat against their kitchen table, forcing her expression into something resembling calm. The 8-year-old didn't need to carry this burden. Not when she was already carrying too much. The worn shoes that pinched her growing feet, the packed lunches that were more creativity than nutrition, the way she never asked for the toys other kids had. Everything's fine, sweetheart. The lie tasted bitter. Mrs. Martinez is expecting you at 7:30 tonight. Remember? I start my new job today. Sophia nodded, her dark eyes, so much like Lyra's own, studying her mother's face with uncomfortable perception. The cleaning job at the old hospital? That's right. Pays well enough for us to catch up on things. Another careful half-truth. The position at Hillcrest Psychiatric Institute paid better than her morning shift at the diner and her afternoon hours at the pharmacy combined. It was also the only employer desperate enough to hire someone with her incomplete nursing degree and gap-filled resume. The job listing had been buried deep in the classifieds. Night custodial position. Former healthcare facility. Must be comfortable working alone. References required. The interview had lasted 15 minutes, conducted by a board supervisor who seemed more interested in whether she could pass a background check than her qualifications. Now, watching Sophia carefully pack her homework into a backpack held together with duct tape, Lyra felt the familiar weight of maternal guilt. 3 years since David had walked out, claiming he wasn't ready for this level of responsibility. 3 years of juggling jobs and childcare, of choosing between groceries and utilities, of watching her bright, beautiful daughter adapt to a world that demanded too much resilience from small shoulders. I'll be back before you wake up, Lyra promised, kneeling to fix Sophia's collar. And tomorrow's Saturday. We can go to the library, maybe get ice cream if money's not too tight, Sophia finished matter-of-factly. I know, Mama. I'm not a baby. The words hit harder than any tantrum could have. Sophia shouldn't know about money being tight. She shouldn't understand the careful calculations behind every small pleasure. The way her mother's face changed when the phone rang during dinner hours. An hour later, Lyra stood before the imposing facade of Hillcrest Psychiatric Institute. The Gothic Revival architecture rose against the October sky like something from a nightmare, all sharp angles and shadowed alcoves. Ivy crawled up the brick walls in skeletal patterns, and several windows on the upper floors were boarded over with weathered plywood. The facility had closed 18 months ago amid budget cuts and scandal. Something about patient abuse allegations that never quite made it to trial. Now it served as a monument to the state's failed mental health system. Empty corridors where desperate people had once sought help that too often never came. Her supervisor, a thin man named Henderson who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, met her at the staff entrance with a ring of keys that could have unlocked half the city. Basic stuff, he explained, his breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. Dust control, trash removal, general maintenance of the accessible areas. State wants the place ready for demolition next spring, but they need environmental clearance first. He handed her a laminated map of the building. Green zones are your responsibility. Yellow zones need special cleaning protocols. There's a manual in the supply closet. Red zones are off-limits. Don't go there. Lyra studied the map. The red zones seemed extensive for a supposedly empty building. Entire wings marked as restricted, including most of the basement levels and several floors in the east wing. What's in the restricted areas? She asked. Henderson shrugged. Asbestos, probably. Maybe some old medical equipment they haven't removed yet. Point is, you don't go there. The building's got security systems still active in those sections. Cameras, motion sensors, the works. Corporate's got some liability concerns about people poking around where they shouldn't. He led her through the main entrance, their footsteps echoing off polished floors that spoke of institutional grandeur from decades past. The lobby retained traces of former elegance. High ceilings with ornate molding, though the reception desk was shrouded in plastic sheeting and dust motes danced in the light from tall windows. Your shift runs midnight to 8 a.m. Building's empty except for you and whatever security patrols swing by. Maybe once a week if you're lucky. Henderson's tone suggested this isolation was a feature, not a bug. There's coffee in the break room on the second floor, and the heating system's still functional in the main areas. Get familiar with the layout tonight. Questions? Lyra shook her head, though dozens of questions crowded her mind. Why maintain security systems in an empty building? Why hire someone to clean a facility scheduled for demolition? Why did Henderson seem so eager to leave? Instead, she asked, "Where do I start?" Henderson handed her the keys and a basic cleaning cart. Administrative wing, second floor. Work your way down. Don't overthink it, they're not expecting miracles. He paused at the door, looking back with an expression she couldn't quite read. And Thompson? Stay out of the basement. Building's got a history, you know? People get spooked down there. Last custodian quit after 2 weeks. Said he heard things. Then he was gone, leaving Lyra alone with the whispers of her own breathing and the distant settling sounds of a building that had housed too much human suffering to ever be truly silent. She began on the second floor, methodically working through offices that still bore the detritus of hasty evacuation. Desk drawers hung open, revealing forgotten patient files and half-empty coffee cups grown moldy with neglect. Family photos remained thumbtacked to bulletin boards. Smiling children and anniversary celebrations watched over by dust-covered plants that had long since withered into brown skeletal remains. Her nursing background kicked in unconsciously as she moved through the space. She recognized the layout of a psychiatric ward, could identify which rooms had been for therapy sessions based on the furniture arrangement, which offices had belonged to prescribing physicians by the remaining pharmaceutical samples scattered across desks. It was in Dr. Patricia Hernandez's former office that she found the first anomaly. The room had been cleaned recently, not just tidied, but professionally sanitized. The desk surface gleamed, file cabinets were locked with new hardware, and the carpet showed vacuum marks that couldn't be more than a few days old. According to her map, this area should have been untouched since the closure. Lyra checked the timestamp on the cleaning schedule Henderson had given her. This room wasn't listed for maintenance until next week. She tried the file cabinets, locked with electronic keypads that definitely hadn't been standard issue for a state mental health facility. Moving down the corridor, she found 3 more offices in similar condition. Recently cleaned, newly secured, completely at odds with the abandoned state of the surrounding rooms. Her map marked them all as green zones, her responsibility, but someone had clearly been here first. The cafeteria on the ground floor told a different story. Tables and chairs stood covered in dust sheets like ghosts at a forgotten party. The serving line was dark, industrial refrigerators unplugged and gaping open, but the coffee station in the corner showed signs of recent use. Fresh water in the reservoir, clean mugs arranged on a recently wiped counter. Lyra's pulse quickened. Henderson had mentioned coffee in the second-floor break room. This was the main cafeteria, supposedly unused since closure. She checked the coffee maker, warm to the touch, with grounds that smelled fresh enough to be from this morning. Someone was using this building. Someone who wasn't supposed to be here. She pulled out her phone to check the time, only to discover she had no signal. The building's concrete and steel construction was probably interfering, but the isolation felt suddenly oppressive. Outside, wind rattled windows and sent shadows dancing across walls in patterns that looked almost like moving figures. The patient wards in the north wing were exactly what she'd expected. Long corridors lined with empty rooms, their doors standing open like mouths frozen in silent screams. Restraint points were still visible on some beds, leather straps cut away but leaving behind metal rings embedded in the frames. Someone had spray-painted over the room numbers, but shadows still showed the original digits underneath. Room 47 drew her attention because the door was closed. According to her map, all patient rooms should be open for ventilation. She tried the handle locked, but with one of the new electronic systems like the file cabinets upstairs. Through the observation window, she could see the room was furnished. Not with the expected empty bed frame and institutional furniture, but with what looked like monitoring equipment. Screens that weren't quite dark, cables snaking across the floor to machines she didn't recognize. Medical equipment. Powered medical equipment. In a building that had been closed for 18 months. Lyra stepped back from the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. Henderson's warnings about the basement suddenly took on new weight. This wasn't just liability concerns or asbestos removal. This was active concealment. She completed her assigned rounds in the administrative areas, but her mind kept returning to that room, to the fresh coffee, to the offices that someone else had already cleaned. By 6 a.m., exhaustion was setting in, her body protesting the overnight schedule after working a double shift at the diner the day before. In the supply closet where Henderson had mentioned the cleaning manual, she found something else entirely. Behind stacks of industrial toilet paper and bottles of disinfectant, a service elevator she hadn't noticed before. Her map didn't show any elevators in this section of the building. The button panel looked newer than the building's original fixtures. Instead of floor numbers, it showed only 3 options: G, B1, and B2. The basement levels Henderson had specifically told her to avoid. She pressed the call button without thinking, driven by the same instincts that had pushed her through nursing school before life had derailed those plans. The elevator arrived silently, its doors opening to reveal a pristine interior that belonged in a modern office building, not a defunct psychiatric facility. Inside, she found a maintenance log hanging from a clipboard. Recent entries, all dated within the past month. HVAC system check, B2 level. Security system test, all levels. Equipment delivery, B1 storage. Equipment delivery, to a building scheduled for demolition. The entries were signed with initials she didn't recognize, but one stood out, M.S., followed by a timestamp from yesterday afternoon. Someone had been here just hours before her shift began. A sound from somewhere deep in the building made her freeze. Not the settling groans of old construction, but something rhythmic, mechanical, like the steady beep of medical monitoring equipment. From the basement levels, from the areas she'd been specifically warned away from. Lyra pressed the G button and rode the elevator back to ground level, her mind racing. Sophia would be waking up soon, expecting her mother to pick her up from Mrs. Martinez's apartment with stories about her boring first night cleaning an empty building. But Hillcrest wasn't empty. Whatever was happening in those basement levels, whatever required fresh medical equipment and recent security updates, it was still active, still operational, still secret. Walking to her car as dawn broke over the facility's gothic silhouette, Lyra felt the weight of choice settling on her shoulders. She needed this job, needed the money it provided, the stability it promised. But she also needed to know what she'd stumbled into. The building watched her leave through dark windows, keeping its secrets for now. But secrets had a way of demanding attention, and Lyra Thompson had never been good at leaving questions unanswered. Behind her, in the depths of Hillcrest's restricted levels, machines continued their steady electronic humming, monitoring vital signs that shouldn't exist in a facility that had been abandoned 18 months ago. 2 weeks into the job, Lyra's life had settled into a rhythm of exhaustion and unease. Sophia's teacher had called again yesterday, the 3rd time this month, about missed assignments and falling asleep in class. The conversation played on repeat in Lyra's mind as she prepared for another night shift. Sophia seems distracted lately, Mrs. Chun had said with the careful concern of an educator who'd seen too many children bearing their parents' struggles. She's mentioned you working nights. How are things at home? Things at home were a careful balance of lies and omissions. Sophia didn't need to know about the eviction notice extensions Lyra had negotiated through tears and desperation. She didn't need to know her mother spent 8 hours each night in a building that felt increasingly wrong. Tonight, the October air bit with unusual cold as Lyra kissed Sophia goodbye at Mrs. Martinez's door. Her daughter's arms lingered around her neck longer than usual. "You smell different, Mama," Sophia murmured against her shoulder. "Like hospitals." The observation struck deeper than it should have. Lyra had started unconsciously cataloging the scents of Hillcrest. Industrial disinfectant layered over something else. Something that reminded her of the medical wards during her nursing rotations. But this was supposed to be an abandoned building. The drive to Hillcrest took her through countryside that grew darker each night as winter approached. Farmhouses dotted the hills like scattered stars, their warm windows a stark contrast to the Gothic silhouette that awaited her. Tonight, she noticed lights in the building's upper floors, just for a moment, flickering behind boarded windows before disappearing. Her keycard beeped at the staff entrance, the sound sharp in the cold air. Inside, the familiar smell hit her immediately, that hospital scent Sophia had noticed, stronger tonight, antiseptic and something underneath it that made her stomach tighten. The administrative wing showed fresh signs of activity. Not the subtle indicators she'd grown accustomed to, but obvious evidence that someone had been working in the offices during the day. In Dr. Hernandez's former office, she found a coffee cup still warm to the touch, sitting beside a laptop computer that definitely hadn't been there yesterday. Lyra stared at the laptop screen, which displayed what looked like patient charts. She recognized the format from her nursing school days: vital signs, medication schedules, treatment notes. But the dates were current. This week. Yesterday. She backed away from the desk without touching anything, her heart hammering against her ribs. Patient charts in an abandoned building. Fresh charts for people who shouldn't exist. The break room coffee pot had been replaced with an even newer model, and fresh pastries sat on a plate beside it. Someone was not only working in this building, they were comfortable here, settled in for extended periods. Her cleaning route took her past the patient wing, where she'd started paying closer attention to the rooms marked with electronic locks. Tonight, she could hear sounds from behind several doors. Not the settling groans of old construction, but human sounds. Soft breathing, the rustle of bedsheets, the steady beep of monitoring equipment. In room 47, the one she'd noticed before, a shadow moved past the observation window. Not the flutter of a loose curtain, but the deliberate movement of someone turning over in bed. Lyra pressed herself against the corridor wall, fighting the urge to look through the window. Someone was in that room. Someone was living in that room, in a building that had been officially empty for 18 months. The supply closet elevator had a new entry in its maintenance log. Midnight rounds, all levels. Patient status stable. Dr. M.S. Midnight rounds. Patient status. The words hit her like physical blows, confirming what she'd been afraid to acknowledge. This wasn't just recent activity in an abandoned building. This was an active medical facility masquerading as a derelict institution. She was fumbling with the maintenance clipboard when footsteps echoed from the main corridor. Not the random sounds she'd convinced herself were structural settling, but deliberate human movement. Multiple people moving with the quiet purpose of medical staff making rounds. Lyra quickly closed the closet and positioned herself near a drinking fountain, trying to look like she belonged while her mind raced. The footsteps passed her location, heading toward the patient wing. She caught a glimpse of white coats, stethoscopes, the professional bearing of doctors or researchers. In an abandoned building. 2 in the morning. She waited until the footsteps faded before making her way to the cafeteria, where the coffee station now showed signs of recent use by multiple people. Several mugs in the sink, fresh cream and sugar supplies, and a bulletin board covered with what looked like staff schedules and medical protocols. The realization hit her with devastating clarity. Hillcrest wasn't abandoned. It was actively operational, conducting some kind of medical program under the cover of being closed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The red zones weren't sealed off for asbestos. They were restricted because they housed whatever was really happening here. She was still processing this when she noticed the man standing near the loading dock entrance. Tall and thin, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent too many nights outside. He watched her with the careful assessment of someone deciding whether she represented danger. "You're Thompson," he said when she approached. Not a question. "The building's supposed to be empty," Lyra replied, though the words felt hollow now. "So they tell you." His voice carried the rough edge of chronic exhaustion and something deeper. Guilt, maybe, or the weight of knowledge he couldn't share. "But you've started noticing things, haven't you? Things that don't fit with empty." She studied his face in the dim security lighting. Mid-40s, unshaven, with eyes that held too much knowledge. "Who are you?" "Jake Morrison. Used to do security here during the transition. Before they decided I knew too much and encouraged me to find work elsewhere." He pulled a cigarette from his pocket but didn't light it. "Been watching you work. You're asking the right questions." "What questions should I be asking?" Jake's smile held no warmth. "Where do the patients go during the day? Why are there fresh medical supplies being delivered to a closed facility? Who's paying for the electricity to keep all that equipment running?" He gestured toward the building's interior. "And why does a custodial job require a background check if you're just cleaning empty rooms?" Each question hit like a physical blow, confirming suspicions she'd been afraid to voice. "What do you know about what's happening here?" "Enough to have trouble sleeping. Enough to know that asking too many questions can be dangerous." Jake's hands shook slightly as he pocketed the unlit cigarette. "There was a nurse here, Patricia Hernandez. Good person like you. Started noticing inconsistencies in patient transfers. Started asking questions about where people were really going. What happened to her? Officially? Took a better position in another state. Unofficially?" Jake's expression darkened. "She's the reason I can't go more than a few hours without a drink. The reason I spend my nights wandering around here trying to figure out what I could have done differently." The mechanical beeping she'd been hearing grew louder, as if the building itself was responding to their conversation. Somewhere in the restricted levels, machines continued their steady rhythm, monitoring vital signs that shouldn't exist. "Why are you telling me this?" Lyra asked. "Because you've got a kid. Because you remind me of Patricia. Too smart and too moral for your own good." Jake stepped back toward the shadows. "And because whatever's happening down there in the red zones, it's getting bigger. More patients, more equipment, more people asking questions they shouldn't be asking." He was almost to the tree line when he turned back. "Thompson, stay in the permitted areas. Don't go looking for answers you're not ready to handle. And if you start seeing things that don't make sense." His voice carried across the cold air like a warning. "Remember that some secrets are worth killing for." As his footsteps faded into the darkness, Lyra stood alone in the loading dock, surrounded by the reality she could no longer deny. Hillcrest wasn't abandoned. It was hidden. Whatever medical program was operating in those basement levels, it required secrecy, required isolation, required people who asked too many questions to disappear. The drive home took her past Sophia's school, where her daughter would arrive in a few hours expecting her mother to help with homework and pack lunches and pretend that everything was normal. But normal had become a carefully constructed lie, and Lyra was beginning to understand that the truth might cost more than she could afford to pay. 3 sleepless days later, Lyra made the decision that would change everything. Sophia had fallen asleep at the kitchen table while doing homework, her small face pressed against pages of math problems she couldn't focus on. The image haunted Lyra as she drove to Hillcrest that night, her daughter's exhaustion mirroring her own, both of them trapped in a cycle that was slowly destroying the life she was trying so desperately to preserve. The building seemed different tonight, charged with an energy that made her skin prickle. The parking lot held 2 additional vehicles, a black SUV and a white van marked with medical supply company logos, not the kind of deliveries an abandoned facility should receive at midnight. Inside, the hospital scent was overwhelming. Not just antiseptic now, but the complex bouquet of active medical care. Latex gloves, pharmaceutical compounds, the metallic tang of equipment under heavy use. Someone had stopped pretending this was an empty building. Her usual rounds felt like a performance for an audience she couldn't see. Every movement seemed monitored, every footstep echoing with purpose beyond simple cleaning. In the administrative wing, she found Dr. Hernandez's office fully operational. Computer humming, coffee warm, papers scattered across the desk in the organized chaos of active work. The papers were patient files. Real ones, with current dates and detailed medical observations. She recognized the format from her nursing school days, but these charts documented procedures she'd never seen before. Neural mapping sessions, cognitive restructuring protocols, memory integration therapy. Her hands trembled as she photographed several pages with her phone, though she doubted the images would be clear enough to read. The technical language was dense, but certain phrases jumped out. Subject compliance improved, neural pathway modification successful, consciousness fragmentation within acceptable parameters. Subject, not patient. Subject. The service elevator called to her like a gravitational pull. Jake's warnings echoed in her mind, but so did the image of Sophia slumped over her homework, bearing the weight of mysteries her mother was too afraid to solve. The maintenance log showed fresh entries. Procedure prep, B2 level. Authorization, Dr. M. S. Patient 47 scheduled for enhanced session. Patient 47. The number had appeared repeatedly in the files upstairs. Lyra pressed the call button before she could change her mind. The elevator arrived silently, its pristine interior reflecting her pale face back in distorted angles. She pressed B2, and the descent felt like falling into the Earth's core. The basement revealed a world that shouldn't exist. Sterile corridors stretched in both directions, lit by harsh fluorescent lighting that hurt her eyes after weeks of working in the building's dimmed upper levels. The walls were lined with observation windows, and behind those windows, people. Living people in hospital beds, connected to machines that monitored their vital signs in real time. Not the vintage equipment she'd expected in an abandoned facility, but cutting-edge technology that belonged in the most advanced medical centers. She moved down the corridor like a sleepwalker, her nursing training automatically cataloging what she saw. For drips, neural monitoring equipment, patients in various states of consciousness, some sleeping peacefully, others moving restlessly against restraints she recognized as standard psychiatric protocol. In room B2-12, she found him. The man in the bed looked to be in his 30s, though something about his face suggested he'd aged beyond his years. Dark hair, thin from what appeared to be medical treatment, and eyes that tracked her movement with startling awareness. A small placard by his bed read, Patient 4070, Wright status, long-term residential. Thomas Wright. The name triggered a memory. She'd seen it in news reports about Hillcrest's closure. A patient who died during the facility's final weeks, his family filing a wrongful death suit that was quietly settled out of court. But Thomas Wright was very much alive and staring directly at her. She approached the observation window slowly, her reflection ghosting over his image in the reinforced glass. His lips moved, forming words she couldn't hear through the barrier. Then he pointed to something beside his bed, a small whiteboard with writing she could barely make out. Help me, it read. They think I'm dead. Lyra's world tilted sideways. A man declared dead 18 months ago was lying in a basement room, connected to machines that monitored his every breath, asking for help with the desperation of someone who'd been forgotten by the world above. Fascinating case, isn't he? The voice behind her was calm, professional, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Lyra spun around to find a man in a white coat watching her with curious interest rather than alarm. Tall, silver-haired, with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades in positions of power. Dr. Marcus Sterling. He introduced himself, extending a hand as if they'd met at a medical conference rather than in a secret basement laboratory. And you must be Ms. Thompson. We've been aware of your curiosity for some time now. Lyra backed against the observation window, feeling Thomas Wright's presence behind the glass like a witness to this moment. This facility is supposed to be closed. These people. Their families think they're dead. Death is such a limited concept, don't you think? Dr. Sterling moved closer, his eyes bright with the fervor of someone explaining a beloved project. What we're doing here transcends traditional notions of mortality. Neural interface technology that could revolutionize treatment for mental illness, trauma, neurological disorders. By experimenting on people without their consent? Consent is a luxury we can't afford when the stakes are this high. Patient 47, for instance. Thomas here was suffering from severe treatment-resistant depression when his family signed the DNR orders. Rather than letting his brain deteriorate, we've given him purpose. His neural patterns are contributing to breakthroughs that will save thousands of lives. Behind the glass, Thomas had pressed his hands against the window, his mouth moving in what looked like screaming, though no sound penetrated the barrier. Dr. Sterling didn't acknowledge him. "You have medical training?" Sterling continued, consulting a tablet that appeared to contain detailed information about her background. "Incomplete nursing degree, but excellent grades in neurological coursework. We could use someone with your observational skills." "You're talking about murder, about kidnapping, about—" "I'm talking about evolution." Sterling's voice hardened. "About pushing the boundaries of human consciousness beyond the limitations that keep us trapped in cycles of suffering. What you see as violation, I see as liberation." The elevator chimed behind them, and Lyra heard footsteps approaching. More medical staff, she realized, arriving for what Sterling had called an enhanced session with patient 47. "Think carefully about what you've seen here, Ms. Thompson," Sterling said as two nurses approached Thomas Wright's room. "We're offering you a choice. Join us in work that will change the world, or continue your life above, pretending you've seen nothing. But remember, some knowledge carries responsibility. And some responsibilities have consequences." The nurses were prepping Thomas for some kind of procedure, connecting additional monitoring equipment while he struggled weakly against restraints. His eyes found Lyra through the observation window, and she saw in them a plea that transcended words. "Choose wisely," Sterling added. "Your daughter Sophia is such a bright child. It would be unfortunate if your curiosity put her future at risk." The threat was delivered with clinical precision, but its impact hit Lyra like a physical blow. Sophia. They knew about Sophia. Whatever was happening in this underground facility, it was protected by people who wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone who threatened their work. As the elevator carried her back to the building's upper levels, Lyra felt the weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders. Thomas Wright's face remained burned into her memory. A man the world believed dead, trapped in a basement laboratory where his suffering served someone else's vision of scientific progress. She completed her shift mechanically, but her mind remained fixed on the choice Sterling had offered. Complicity or consequences, safety or moral obligation, her daughter's future or the lives of people like Thomas Wright, forgotten by a world that had already mourned their deaths. By dawn, she knew that whatever decision she made would change everything. The only question was whether she had the courage to choose justice over survival, and whether that choice would cost more than she could bear to pay. Lyra sat in her car outside Mrs. Martinez's apartment building for 20 minutes before finding the strength to climb the stairs. Her hands shook as she knocked on the door, and when Sophia appeared, hair mussed from sleep, still in her pajamas, Lyra had to grip the doorframe to keep from collapsing. "Mama!" Sophia's voice carried immediate concern. "You look sick. Just tired, sweetheart." Lyra pulled her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of strawberry shampoo and innocence. Over Sophia's head, she met Mrs. Martinez's worried gaze. "Mija," the elderly woman said softly, "you need to sleep. You can't keep this up." Sleep. As if she could close her eyes without seeing Thomas Wright's face pressed against that observation window, his mouth forming silent screams while Dr. Sterling discussed his neural patterns like he was discussing lab equipment. At home, Sophia chattered about a science project while Lyra mechanically prepared breakfast, her mind cycling through impossible scenarios. Call the police, but Sterling had implied connections that went beyond local law enforcement. Contact the media. But who would believe a story this outrageous without proof? Run. But where could they go that Sterling's people wouldn't find them? Mama, you're burning the eggs. Lyra startled back to the present, quickly turning off the burner. Sophia stood beside her, studying her mother's face with the uncomfortable perception that had always made her seem older than her 8 years. Are you in trouble at work? Sophia asked. The question hit harder than any accusation could have. Her daughter knew something was wrong, could sense the weight crushing down on both their lives. Why would you ask that? You smell like hospitals more now, and you don't sleep when you come home. I can hear you walking around. Sophia's dark eyes held knowledge no child should carry. Are we going to have to move again? Lyra knelt to Sophia's eye level, taking her small hands in both of hers. We're not going anywhere, I promise. Mama's just figuring some things out. But even as she said the words, Lyra knew they might be a lie. Sterling's threat echoed in her mind. Your daughter Sophia is such a bright child. It would be unfortunate if your curiosity put her future at risk. After dropping Sophia at school, Lyra drove to the public library and spent 3 hours researching everything she could find about Meridian Corporation, neural interface technology, and Dr. Marcus Sterling. What she discovered made her stomach turn. Meridian was a pharmaceutical giant with connections to military research contracts and classified government programs. Their neural interface division had received over $180 million in funding over the past 2 years, ostensibly for developing treatments for PTSD and traumatic brain injury in veterans. Dr. Sterling's background was more troubling. A brilliant neuroscientist who'd been quietly forced out of 3 prestigious research positions for ethics violations. The details were vague, sealed by legal settlements and non-disclosure agreements, but a pattern emerged of pushing experimental boundaries beyond acceptable limits. The most chilling discovery was a series of obituaries from the past 2 years. Patients from various psychiatric facilities who died during routine treatments, their deaths explained by complications from their underlying conditions. All the facilities had connections to Meridian Corporation. All the patients had been isolated from family support systems. Thomas Wright's obituary was among them, dated 18 months ago. Beloved son who struggled with depression. Died peacefully during treatment at Hillcrest Psychiatric Institute. Except Thomas Wright wasn't dead. He was strapped to a bed in a basement laboratory, his brain being mapped and modified for research that his family would never know about. Lyra printed everything she could, stuffing the papers into a manila envelope with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. She needed help, needed someone who understood the scope of what she'd discovered. But who could she trust? Who would believe her without thinking she'd suffered some kind of breakdown? Her phone rang as she walked to her car. Unknown number. Ms. Thompson? The voice was unfamiliar but carried an authority that made her pulse spike. This is Agent Sarah Collins with the Department of Health and Human Services. I'd like to speak with you about your employment at Hillcrest Psychiatric Institute. Lyra's throat went dry. I don't know what you mean. Ms. Thompson, we're investigating irregularities in federal research funding. Your observations could be valuable to our inquiry. A pause. I think we should meet in person, somewhere private. I haven't observed anything irregular. Please don't make this more difficult than necessary. There are indications that Meridian Corporation may be misusing federal grants in ways that violate both research ethics and federal law. If you've seen evidence of ongoing medical activities at Hillcrest, you could be in considerable danger. The words sent ice through Lyra's veins. If Agent Collins knew about the illegal research, why hadn't she stopped it? Was she investigating Sterling's operation, or was she part of the cover-up? I need to think about this, Lyra said. Ms. Thompson, if Meridian suspects you've discovered their activities, thinking may be a luxury you can't afford. Meet me at Riverside Park, the playground area, at 2 p.m. Come alone and bring anything you may have documented. The line went dead, leaving Lyra staring at her phone in the library parking lot. Agent Collins had sounded legitimate, professional, concerned for her safety. But Sterling had seemed professional too, right up until he'd threatened Sophia. She drove home through streets that felt foreign, hyper-aware of every car that followed the same route, every face that seemed to linger too long in her rearview mirror. paranoia or justified caution? She couldn't tell the difference anymore. At home, she called in sick to her morning job at the diner, claiming a family emergency. The lie felt small compared to the larger deception her life had become. Then she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the manila envelope full of evidence and trying to decide who to trust with information that could get them both killed. Her laptop chimed with a new email. No sender address, just a subject line that made her blood freeze. Regarding Sophia's safety, the message contained a single photo. Sophia walking out of her school, backpack over her shoulder, completely unaware that someone was taking pictures. Below the image, a brief message. Some conversations are best kept private. Tonight's shift will proceed as normal. Any deviation from routine could have unfortunate consequences. Lyra's hands shook as she deleted the email, but the image remained burned into her memory. They weren't just watching her, they were watching Sophia. Whatever game Sterling was playing, her daughter had become a pawn. The phone rang again. This time, she recognized Jake Morrison's number. "They know," he said without preamble. "Sterling's people have been asking questions about you, about whether you've made contact with anyone outside the facility." "How do you know this?" "Because I still have friends in security, people who owe me favors." Jake's voice carried exhaustion and something deeper. Resignation, maybe, or the acceptance that some fights couldn't be won. "Listen to me carefully. Whatever you're thinking of doing, don't. These people have resources you can't imagine. They've made bigger problems than you disappear without a trace. They have a man down there who's supposed to be dead. They're experimenting on people whose families think they're gone." "I know. I've known for months, and knowing hasn't helped anyone. So we just let it continue? Let them destroy more lives?" Jake was quiet for so long she thought he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd wrestled with the same questions and found no good answers. "There might be a way," he said, "but it would mean risking everything. Your job, your freedom, your daughter's safety. And even if we succeed, there's no guarantee anyone would believe us." Lyra thought about Thomas Wright's face pressed against that observation window, about the other patients she'd seen in those basement rooms, about families who'd grieved for people who were still alive and suffering. Then she thought about Sophia, about the photo someone had taken without her knowledge, about the careful life she'd built crumbling around the weight of secrets she couldn't carry alone. "Tell me," she said, "not over the phone. Tonight, after your shift, there's an all-night diner on Route 9, about 10 miles north of Hillcrest. Meet me there at 9 a.m. Jake's voice carried the gravity of someone crossing a line they could never uncross. "And Thompson, if you're going to do this, you need to be sure. Because once we start, there's no going back. For either of us." The line went dead, leaving Lyra alone with the weight of choice. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, promising the kind of weather that washed away evidence and covered the sounds that desperate people made when they realized they were fighting for more than their own survival. Sophia would be home from school in 3 hours, expecting help with homework and dinner and the normalcy that her mother could no longer provide. But normalcy had become complicity, and Lyra was beginning to understand that some choices couldn't be delayed, no matter how much they cost. That night, Lyra's hands trembled as she badged into Hillcrest. The building felt different, watchful, predatory. Security cameras she'd never noticed before tracked her movement through the lobby. In the administrative wing, Dr. Sterling waited in Dr. Hernandez's former office, reviewing files with clinical detachment. "Ms. Thompson," he greeted her without looking up. "I trust you've given our conversation careful consideration." She forced her voice steady. "I want to understand what you're doing here." Sterling smiled, closing the patient file. "Understanding requires commitment. Are you prepared for that level of involvement?" Lyra's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Martinez. "Sophia asking when you'll be home. Should I tell her you're working late again?" The message felt like a lifeline to the world above, where her daughter waited for normalcy that no longer existed. "Show me," Lyra said. Sterling led her through corridors she'd cleaned for weeks, past rooms that had seemed empty, but now revealed themselves as staging areas. Equipment covered by sheets, supplies organized with military precision, workstations that suggested round-the-clock operations. The service elevator descended deeper than before. Sub-basement level 3, a floor that hadn't appeared on any maintenance log. This is where the real work happens, Sterling explained as the doors opened onto a facility that belonged in a science fiction film. Neural mapping, consciousness transfer protocols, memory reconstruction therapy. We're quite literally rewriting the human experience. The corridor stretched longer than the building's footprint should have allowed, lined with observation windows that revealed horrors Lyra's nursing training hadn't prepared her for. Patients, subjects, connected to machines that monitored more than vital signs. Screens displayed brain activity in real time, neural pathways lighting up like city maps as procedures she couldn't identify altered the fundamental architecture of human consciousness. Patient 23 suffered from severe PTSD, Sterling noted, pausing at one window. Military veteran, multiple deployments, classic case of treatment-resistant trauma. We've successfully isolated and modified the neural pathways associated with his traumatic memories. He no longer experiences nightmares, flashbacks, or anxiety responses. Behind the glass, a young man sat motionless, staring at nothing with eyes that held no recognition of the world around him. Alive but empty, breathing but not living. You've lobotomized him, Lyra whispered. We've freed him from suffering. The memories that tormented him for years have been safely contained. He experiences peace. He experiences nothing. You've stolen his personality, his identity. We've given him relief. Sterling's voice hardened. Would you prefer he continue suffering? That his family watch him destroy himself with alcohol and rage and the inability to function in civilian society? At the corridor's end, she found Jake Morrison, not lurking in shadows as she'd expected, but dressed in scrubs, updating patient charts with the efficiency of medical staff. He looked up as they approached, his expression unreadable. Jake, Lyra's voice cracked. What are you doing here? His job, Sterling answered. Mr. Morrison has been quite helpful in monitoring our subjects. His security background makes him particularly effective at identifying potential behavioral issues. Jake's eyes met hers, and she saw something there: guilt, resignation, and a desperate attempt at communication. His hand moved slightly, pointing toward a clipboard hanging beside patient 47's room. Thomas Wright lay exactly as she'd seen him before, but now she noticed details that her shock had obscured. The restraints weren't just medical protocol, they were necessary. His movements were erratic, purposeless, like someone fighting against neural pathways that no longer connected properly. Thomas is one of our most successful cases, Sterling continued. Severe depression had rendered him virtually catatonic. Now look at him, active, responsive, participating in groundbreaking research that will help thousands of others. He asked for help, Lyra said. He wrote that they think he's dead. Dissociative episodes are common during the integration process. The brain struggles to accept its new neural architecture, but these episodes decrease over time as the modified pathways stabilize. Jake stepped closer, his movement seeming casual but positioned to block Sterling's view of the clipboard. Written in barely legible handwriting, Evidence Room B3C. Access code 4791. Dr. Park inside. Dr. Park. Lyra remembered the name from the patient files upstairs. A junior researcher who'd signed off on several procedures but whose notes seemed increasingly reluctant, filled with qualifications and concerns. I'd like to review the medical protocols, Lyra said, her nursing background providing cover for the request. To better understand the therapeutic benefits. Sterling studied her face with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading deception. Dr. Park can provide that orientation. She's been eager to discuss our methodology with someone who has clinical training. They found Dr. Lisa Park in a small office that felt more like a prison cell than a workspace. Young, Asian, with the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who'd seen too much and slept too little. When Sterling introduced Lyra, something flickered across Park's face. Hope, maybe, or desperate recognition. Dr. Park will explain our neural interface protocols, Sterling said. I'll leave you to discuss the technical details. The moment his footsteps faded, Park's professional facade crumbled. You shouldn't be here, she whispered. This place. What they're doing. It's not research. It's torture disguised as medicine. Then why are you helping them? Because they have my sister. Park's hands shook as she pulled up files on her computer. Lisa Park, my twin. She was admitted to a Meridian facility for eating disorders 6 months ago. They said she died from complications, but I know she's here somewhere. They're using her to keep me compliant. The files on Park's screen showed the true scope of Sterling's operation. Not just Hillcrest, but a network of facilities across 3 states. Hundreds of patients declared dead while their families grieved, their bodies and minds serving as test subjects for procedures that violated every principle of medical ethics. We have to stop this, Lyra said. How? They have connections everywhere, government contracts, military funding, politicians who believe in their vision of enhanced human consciousness. Park's voice carried the despair of someone who'd tried and failed. They made me sign agreements that would destroy my career and my freedom if I ever spoke about what I've seen. There has to be evidence. Documentation they can't destroy. Park glanced toward the door, then pulled a flash drive from her pocket. Everything's on here. Patient files, procedure videos, financial records. But getting it out. She pressed the drive into Lyra's palm. They monitor everything. Every exit, every communication, every person who enters or leaves this place. Outside Park's office, footsteps approached with military precision. Sterling's voice carried through the thin walls. I think Ms. Thompson has seen enough for tonight. Time to return to the surface. Lyra pocketed the flash drive as the door opened, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd found the evidence that could expose Sterling's operation, but she was trapped 3 floors underground in a facility controlled by people who viewed murder as an acceptable cost of scientific progress. The elevator ride to the surface felt like ascending from hell, carrying secrets that could destroy lives, including her own. The flash drive burned in Lyra's pocket as she completed her remaining cleaning tasks under Sterling's watchful eye. Every movement felt choreographed, performed for an audience that could read guilt in the slightest tremor. When her shift ended at 8 a.m., she walked to her car with legs that threatened to buckle, the weight of evidence and terror making each step feel like drowning. Sophia was already at school by the time Lyra reached home, sparing her daughter the sight of her mother's breakdown. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the innocuous piece of plastic that contained proof of horrors most people would refuse to believe. Patient files, procedure videos, financial records linking a $180 million government contract to the systematic torture of vulnerable people. Her laptop felt foreign under trembling fingers as she inserted the drive. The files opened like windows into hell. Video recordings of procedures that had no names in legitimate medicine, brain scans showing deliberate damage to neural pathways, financial spreadsheets tracking the cost-effectiveness of different experimental protocols. One folder contained photographs of the facility's victims, before and after images that told stories of human destruction. Thomas Wright smiled from a family photo. Graduation day, proud parents flanking a young man full of hope. The after image showed him strapped to a bed, eyes vacant, neural interface cables disappearing into ports surgically embedded in his skull. Lyra was still staring at the files when her phone rang. Unknown number. Ms. Thompson. Agent Sarah Collins' voice carried new urgency. We need to meet immediately. There are indications that your situation has become critically dangerous. How do you know about my situation? Because Meridian Corporation has been under federal investigation for 8 months. Dr. Sterling's operation at Hillcrest is one of several facilities we've been monitoring. Pause filled with implications. But our investigation has been complicated by the source of their funding. What do you mean? The $180 million supporting their research comes from classified military contracts. Neural interface technology for enhanced soldier performance, interrogation techniques, psychological warfare applications. Collins' voice dropped. There are people in very high places who consider Sterling's work essential to national security. Lyra's blood turned to ice. You're saying the government is protecting them? I'm saying the situation is more complex than simple law enforcement can handle. Meet me at Riverside Park in 1 hour. And Ms. Thompson, if you have any evidence, bring it. We may have a very narrow window to act before this investigation gets shut down permanently. After ending the call, Lyra sat in her kitchen trying to process the implications. Sterling's operation wasn't just protected by corporate lawyers and NDAs. It had government backing at the highest levels. The people she'd trusted to investigate were themselves being investigated. Her neighbor's dog barking drew her attention to the window. A black SUV sat across the street, its occupants making no effort to conceal their surveillance. As she watched, a second vehicle pulled up behind it. They weren't hiding anymore. The pretense of normalcy had ended. Lyra copied the flash drive's contents onto her laptop, then uploaded everything to a secure cloud storage account she created using Sophia's school library card. If something happened to her, if she disappeared like Dr. Hernandez and the others, at least the evidence would survive. A knock at her front door made her freeze. Through the peephole, she saw Henderson, her supervisor, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits who radiated the kind of authority that came with federal badges. Ms. Thompson. Henderson's voice carried nervous energy. We need to discuss some irregularities in your work performance. She didn't answer, instead backing away from the door toward the kitchen's rear exit. The knocking became more insistent, then stopped entirely. Footsteps circled the house. They were surrounding her, cutting off escape routes with professional efficiency. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Mama, men came to my school asking about you. Mrs. Chun made me stay inside. Are you okay? The message hit like a physical blow. They'd gone to Sophia's school. Whatever game Sterling was playing, he'd escalated to direct threats against her daughter. Lyra grabbed her laptop and car keys, slipping out the back door as the front doorbell rang again. Her car started on the second try, and she backed out of the garage with hands that shook so badly she could barely grip the steering wheel. The black SUVs followed her through residential streets with the confidence of people who knew their quarry had nowhere to run. At every intersection, she expected them to force her to stop, to end this chase with whatever methods federal authority allowed when national security was involved. Instead, they maintained distance, herding her toward a destination she couldn't identify. It wasn't until she reached the highway that she understood. They were driving her toward Riverside Park, toward her meeting with Agent Collins. Her phone rang as she pulled into the park's empty lot. Agent Collins stood beside a sedan 50 yards away, her professional bearing apparent even at distance. Ms. Thompson, I can see you've been followed. Don't approach my vehicle directly. There's a restroom building between us. Meet me there in 2 minutes. Inside the concrete structure, Collins waited with the tense energy of someone operating under extreme pressure. Do you have the evidence? Lyra handed over a copy of the flash drive. Everything's on there. Patient files, financial records, video documentation of procedures that violate every principle of medical ethics. Collins pocketed the drive without examining it. This confirms what we suspected, but it also creates a problem. The people protecting Sterling's operation have resources that exceed my authority to investigate. What does that mean? It means that, as of this morning, I've been ordered to close the Hillcrest investigation and transfer all materials to a classified military intelligence unit. Collins met Lyra's eyes with the steady gaze of someone delivering a death sentence. It means that officially this conversation never happened, and you were never in contact with federal law enforcement. You're abandoning the investigation? I'm being forced to abandon it. But that doesn't mean it ends here. Collins pulled a different phone from her jacket, a burner device that suggested she'd been planning this conversation carefully. There are journalists who specialize in stories the government prefers to keep buried. People who understand how to protect sources and get information to the public despite official pressure. The restroom door opened, and Henderson entered with one of the suited men from her house. Ms. Thompson, you need to come with us. There are national security implications to consider. Collins stepped between them, her hand moving to her weapon with practiced ease. Agent Collins, Department of Health and Human Services. Ms. Thompson is under federal protection as a material witness. Not anymore. The suited man produced credentials that made Colin's face go pale. This investigation has been transferred to military intelligences. Thompson's testimony is no longer required. For a moment, the concrete restroom felt like a battleground where competing authorities faced off over the right to determine truth. Then Colin stepped aside, her expression conveying more than words could. Some fights couldn't be won through official channels. "Remember what we discussed," she said quietly as Henderson and his companion flanked Lyra. "Some stories are too important to bury." As they escorted her toward the black SUV, Lyra caught sight of Sophia being led from a school bus toward another vehicle. Her daughter's face showed confusion rather than fear. She didn't understand that her life had just been weaponized in a game where the rules were written by people who viewed human suffering as an acceptable cost of scientific progress. The SUV's door closed with the finality of a prison cell, carrying Lyra toward a confrontation where the stakes had escalated far beyond her ability to control. Behind her, Agent Collins stood alone in an empty parking lot, holding evidence that might never see the light of day. Lyra's voice remained steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "Let her go. She's not part of this. Everyone's part of this now." Sterling guided Sophia toward the building entrance. "Your daughter will be perfectly safe as long as you remain cooperative. We simply need to ensure you understand the full scope of what we're accomplishing here." Inside Hillcrest's lobby, Jake Morrison waited with Dr. Park, both wearing the hollow expressions of people who'd crossed lines they couldn't uncross. Sophia looked between the adults, sensing danger but trusting her mother's presence to keep her safe. The elevator descended past the floors Lyra knew, past the basement levels where she discovered Thomas Wright, into depths that felt like descending into the Earth's core. Sophia's small hand gripped hers with trust that made Lyra's heart break. Her daughter still believed her mother could protect her from anything. "Where are we going?" Sophia whispered as the elevator continued its descent. "Dr. Sterling wants to show us something very special," Lyra replied, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. She caught Jake's eye in the elevator's reflection, seeing something there she hadn't noticed before. A small device palmed in his hand, fingers moving in patterns that looked like texting. Sterling stood beside them with the relaxed confidence of someone who controlled every variable. "Your mother is going to help us with a very important project, Sophia. Something that will help sick people feel better." The elevator opened onto sub-basement level 4, a floor that existed beyond any architectural plan. The corridor stretched impossibly long, lined with observation windows that revealed horrors Lyra's nursing training hadn't prepared her for. But these weren't the semi-conscious subjects she'd seen before. These patients were awake, aware, and screaming silently behind soundproof glass. "Our advanced protocols," Sterling explained as they walked past rooms filled with people strapped to tables, their skulls open to expose brain tissue being systematically mapped and modified. "We've moved beyond simple neural interface technology into direct consciousness manipulation." Sophia pressed closer to Lyra's side, her 8-year-old mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "Mama, why are those people tied down? Why do they look scared?" "They're not scared, sweetheart," Sterling said before Lyra could answer. "They're experiencing something wonderful. Freedom from the limitations that make life difficult. Pain, fear, sadness, we can remove all of those things." In room SB 4-17, Lyra recognized a face from the missing persons files she'd researched. Maria Santos, a young mother who'd disappeared 6 months ago while seeking treatment for postpartum depression. Her family had searched desperately, filing police reports that went nowhere, organizing search parties that found nothing. But Maria wasn't missing. She was strapped to a table while machines systematically erased the neural pathways that made her human. "Maria's case is particularly instructive," Sterling continued, noting Lyra's recognition. "Severe postpartum depression, thoughts of harming herself and her infant. Her family brought her to one of our affiliated facilities for treatment. Rather than subjecting her to years of ineffective therapy and medication, we've given her peace." Behind the glass, Maria's eyes tracked their movement with the desperate awareness of someone trapped in her own body. Her mouth moved in what looked like pleas for help, though no sound penetrated the barrier. "You've destroyed her," Lyra said. "Her family thinks she's dead. Her baby is growing up without a mother. Her baby is growing up without a mother who might have harmed him. We've prevented a tragedy while advancing research that will help thousands of similar cases." Sterling's voice carried the fervor of someone who'd rationalized atrocity into virtue. "This is evolution, Ms. Thompson. The next step in human development." They continued down the corridor, past rooms that contained dozens of victims, missing persons whose disappearances had been carefully orchestrated to feed Sterling's research. Each case represented a family destroyed, a life stolen, a person reduced to neural tissue and experimental data. At the corridor's end, they found Victoria Meridian waiting in what appeared to be a command center. Banks of monitors displayed real-time data from hundreds of subjects, their brain activity reduced to scrolling numbers and fluctuating graphs. She stood with the bearing of someone reviewing quarterly profits rather than human suffering. "Ms. Thompson," Meridian said without looking away from the screens, "Dr. Sterling tells me you've become quite interested in our work. This isn't work. This is systematic murder. This is the future of human consciousness. Do you have any idea how much suffering these procedures will eliminate? Depression, anxiety, PTSD, addiction. We can cure them all by simply removing the neural pathways that cause psychological distress." Sophia tugged at Lyra's hand. "Mama, I want to go home. These people are scary." Meridian's attention shifted to Sophia with the calculating interest of someone identifying a new test subject. "Your daughter is quite perceptive. We've been developing pediatric protocols, early intervention to prevent the development of mental illness before it can take root." The threat was delivered with clinical precision, but its impact hit Lyra like a physical blow. They weren't just threatening to kill Sophia, they were threatening to lobotomize her, to steal her personality and replace it with empty compliance. "You won't touch her," Lyra said, pulling Sophia behind her. "We won't need to if you cooperate. Your nursing background makes you valuable to our operations. Work with us, help us refine our protocols, and Sophia can grow up normally. Refuse." Meridian gestured toward the monitors showing hundreds of subjects. "Well, you've seen what happens to people who become obstacles." Jake Morrison had been silent during their tour, but now he stepped forward with the resigned determination of someone who'd made an irreversible decision. "There's something you should know," he said, pulling out the device Lyra had seen in the elevator. "I've been recording everything. Video, audio, GPS coordinates, all of it streaming live to servers Agent Collins provided." Sterling's composure cracked for the first time. "That's impossible. Our signal jammers." "Your signal jammers work on civilian frequencies. Military-grade communication equipment operates on different channels." Jake's smile held no warmth. "Did you think Collins would send someone in here without backup?" Alarms began blaring throughout the facility, red lights flashing in patterns that suggested emergency lockdown protocols. On the monitors, Lyra could see federal agents moving through the upper levels, their tactical gear and purposeful movement indicating this wasn't a negotiation. Meridian moved to a control panel with the efficiency of someone who'd planned for this contingency. "Initiate Protocol 7, she ordered into a communications device. "All evidence must be sanitized." The monitors went dark as she spoke, and throughout the facility, Lyra could hear the mechanical whir of equipment powering down. They were destroying evidence, eliminating the proof of their crimes by killing the witnesses who could testify. "The subjects," Dr. Park said, her voice breaking, "if you shut down their life support." "Acceptable losses," Meridian replied. "The research data is more valuable than individual test subjects." Through the observation windows, Lyra could see patients beginning to convulse as their monitoring equipment went dark. People like Thomas Wright and Maria Santos, victims who'd already suffered beyond imagination, now facing death as their captors eliminated loose ends. Sterling pulled a weapon from his jacket, its barrel trained on Sophia with steady precision. "The federal raid ends here. We have hostages and we have leverage. Ms. Thompson's cooperation ensures everyone leaves safely." Sophia pressed against Lyra's side, finally understanding that the adults around her represented genuine danger. "Mama, make them stop. Please make them stop." The command center shook as explosions echoed from somewhere above. Federal agents breaching the facility's security barriers. But they were 4 levels underground, surrounded by people who viewed murder as an acceptable cost of protecting their research. Jake moved toward Sterling with the careful steps of someone approaching a dangerous animal. "It's over, Doctor. Let the kid go. She's not part of this. She's part of it now. Everyone who's seen our work is part of it." Sterling's finger moved to the trigger. "This research represents the future of human evolution. I won't let small minds destroy decades of progress." Dr. Park stepped between Sterling and Sophia, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd finally found her courage. "I won't let you hurt a child. Not after everything else we've done here." "Dr. Park, step aside. Your sister's life depends on your cooperation." "My sister is already dead. I've seen the files. You killed her months ago and used her memory to control me." Park's hands moved to the control panel. "But I can still save these people. I can restart their life support." Sterling's attention shifted to Park for just an instant, long enough for Jake to close the distance between them. The weapon discharged as they struggled, its sound deafening in the enclosed space. But the bullet went wide, embedding in electronic equipment that exploded in showers of sparks. Lyra grabbed Sophia and Dove behind a bank of computers as chaos erupted around them. Meridian was screaming orders into her communications device, while Dr. Park worked frantically to restore power to the patient monitoring systems. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red. And through it all, federal agents could be heard moving through the levels above, their voices growing closer. "Mama, are we going to die?" Sophia whispered against her shoulder. "No, sweetheart. We're going to be okay. The good people are coming to help us." But even as she said the words, Lyra could see Sterling and Jake still fighting for control of the weapon, could hear Meridian activating what sounded like a facility self-destruct sequence. The monitors showing patient vital signs flickered between dark and active as Dr. Park fought to keep people alive while the building systems tried to kill them. Through the observation windows, Lyra could see Thomas Wright struggling against his restraints, lucid enough to understand that his survival depended on escaping the room that had been his prison. His eyes met hers through the glass, and she saw in them not just desperation, but determination. The will to survive that had sustained him through months of torture. The command center door burst open as federal agents in tactical gear flooded the space, their weapons trained on Sterling and Meridian with professional precision. "Federal agents, drop your weapons and step away from the hostages." Sterling released his grip on the gun, raising his hands with the resigned expression of someone who'd gambled everything and lost. But Meridian moved to a final control panel, her finger hovering over what appeared to be a red emergency button. "This facility contains classified research essential to national security," she announced. "I'm authorized to destroy all evidence to prevent it from falling into unauthorized hands. Ma'am, step away from the controls. We have authorization to secure all materials related to this investigation." "Your authorization doesn't supersede mine. This research belongs to people who understand its true value." Agent Collins appeared in the doorway, her professional composure intact despite the chaos around them. "Ms. Meridian, you're under arrest for violations of federal research ethics laws, conspiracy to commit murder, and violation of the Nuremberg Code. Step away from the controls." "The Nuremberg Code?" Meridian's laugh was bitter. "These aren't war crimes, this is scientific progress. We're curing mental illness, eliminating human suffering, advancing our species beyond the limitations of biology. By torturing innocent people, by stealing lives and destroying families." Collins moved closer, her weapon steady. "Step away from the controls. Now." Instead, Meridian slammed her hand down on the emergency button. Klaxons blared throughout the facility as automated systems began shutting down everything: life support, ventilation, electrical power. In the patient rooms, people who'd been kept alive by machines began fighting for breath as their equipment went dark. "No!" Dr. Park screamed, rushing to the manual override controls. I can restart them manually, but I need time. Federal agents moved through the facility with desperate efficiency, working to evacuate victims while emergency medical teams set up triage areas in the upper levels. But 4 stories underground, with primary systems failing and backup power lasting only minutes, time was a luxury they didn't have. Lyra held Sophia close as emergency lighting failed, and the command center plunged into darkness broken only by the flickering screens of equipment fighting to stay operational. Around them, federal agents worked by flashlight to secure Sterling and Meridian, while Dr. Park fought to save lives with systems designed to destroy evidence. Thomas Wright is in room SB4-23. Lyra called to the agents. He's been here for 18 months. His family thinks he's dead. We'll get him, Collins replied. We'll get all of them. But as water began seeping through the ceiling, sprinkler systems activated by the emergency protocol, Lyra wondered if they'd found the truth too late to save the people who'd paid the ultimate price for Sterling's vision of human evolution. In the darkness of a flooding basement laboratory, surrounded by the machinery of systematic torture, she held her daughter and listened to federal agents working desperately to extract victims from a facility designed to make people disappear forever. The sound of Thomas Wright's voice carried through the chaos, weak but determined, calling out room numbers and patient names, helping his rescuers navigate a facility he'd memorized during months of captivity. His survival had become their salvation, his memory the key to saving others who'd been written off as dead. As federal agents carried Sophia toward the surface in safety, Lyra looked back at the facility that had nearly destroyed them all. Water was rising in the command center, and emergency lighting flickered like dying stars. But people were being saved. Victims who'd been forgotten by the world above were being carried toward light and freedom and the possibility of healing. Sterling and Meridian would face justice. The evidence Dr. Park had preserved would expose the full scope of their crimes. And somewhere above, families who'd grieved for missing loved ones would learn that hope wasn't always a cruel illusion. Sometimes, against impossible odds, the disappeared came home. 6 months later, Lyra stood at the witness table in the Senate hearing room, her hand raised as she swore to tell the truth about Hillcrest Psychiatric Institute. The ornate chamber buzzed with media attention and public outrage that had been building since the first news reports emerged about the basement horrors discovered beneath the shuttered facility. State your name for the record, the committee chairman requested. Lyra Thompson. I was employed as a night custodian at Hillcrest from October 15th through November 8th of last year. Behind her in the gallery, Sophia sat between Mrs. Martinez and Agent Collins, her small hands folded carefully in her lap. The 8-year-old had grown quieter since their ordeal, more watchful, but she'd insisted on attending today's hearing. I want to see the bad people get in trouble, she'd told Lyra that morning with the fierce determination of someone who'd looked evil in the face and survived. Ms. Thompson, Senator Reynolds continued, please describe what you discovered during your employment at Hillcrest. Lyra had given this testimony dozens of times, to FBI investigators, federal prosecutors, congressional staff members, and journalists. Each telling became easier in some ways, harder in others. The facts remained constant, but the weight of them never lessened. I discovered an active medical research facility operating in the basement levels of what was officially an abandoned building. The facility was conducting illegal human experimentation on patients whose families believed them to be dead. The chamber erupted in murmurs despite the chairman's repeated calls for order. Even 6 months later, the scope of Sterling's operation shocked people who thought they understood institutional corruption. How many victims were found at the Hillcrest facility? Senator Williams asked. 47 confirmed victims were recovered alive from the basement levels. An additional 36 remains were found in areas that had been sealed off. Lyra's voice remained steady, though the numbers never failed to stagger her. Medical records indicate that over 200 people had been processed through the facility since its official closure. In the media section, she could see Thomas Wright sitting with his family. His recovery had been slower than hoped. The neural modifications had left him with memory gaps and motor control issues that might never fully heal. But he was alive, and he was home, and he was learning to be Thomas again rather than patient 47. The committee has reviewed financial records indicating that Meridian Corporation received $180 million in federal funding for this research, Senator Reynolds said. Were you aware of the government connections while you were employed there? I learned about the funding sources during the federal investigation. At the time, I only knew that people were being held against their will and subjected to procedures that violated every principle of medical ethics. Senator Williams leaned forward. Ms. Thompson, you had no medical training beyond incomplete nursing coursework, yet you recognized the illegality of what you witnessed. Why do you think trained medical professionals like Dr. Sterling and Dr. Park participated in these experiments? The question hit at the heart of what haunted Lyra most. How had healing professionals been convinced to torture the people they'd sworn to help? Dr. Park was coerced. Her sister was being held hostage to ensure her compliance. But Dr. Sterling. Lyra paused, choosing her words carefully. I think he genuinely believed he was advancing human knowledge. He saw the suffering he caused as acceptable because he thought it would prevent greater suffering in the future. The ends justifying the means? The ends justifying anything. When you convince yourself that your vision of progress is more important than individual human dignity, there's no limit to the harm you can rationalize. In the gallery, she caught sight of Dr. Lisa Park, who'd been granted immunity in exchange for her testimony. Park now worked at a veterans hospital in Oregon, specializing in treating PTSD, her way of atoning for the harm she'd been forced to enable. They'd spoken several times since the trials, each conversation a careful navigation of shared trauma and guilt. The hearing continued for 3 hours, covering everything from the mechanics of how victims were selected to the specific neural modifications that had been performed. Lyra answered every question with the precision of someone who'd lived with these facts for half a year, but inside, she felt the familiar exhaustion that came with repeatedly excavating her own trauma for public consumption. When the session finally adjourned, she found herself surrounded by reporters shouting questions about movie rights and book deals and her plans for the future. Agent Collins appeared at her elbow with the protective efficiency she'd shown throughout the investigation. Cars waiting outside, Collins said, guiding Lyra and Sophia through the crowd. We can avoid most of them if we move quickly. In the sedan's back seat, Sophia leaned against her mother's shoulder with the boneless exhaustion of a child who'd spent too long being good in a room full of adults discussing terrible things. Is it over now, Mama? Sophia asked. Are the bad people really going to jail? Lyra smoothed her daughter's hair, thinking about the question's complexity. Sterling had been sentenced to life in prison without parole. Victoria Meridian faced similar charges, though her expensive legal team was still filing appeals. Dozens of government officials had resigned or been reassigned. Congressional oversight of classified research programs had been strengthened. Families of victims were receiving compensation and support services. But justice felt incomplete when measured against the scope of what had been done. How do you compensate a family for 18 months of grieving someone who was alive but tortured? How do you restore neural pathways that have been deliberately damaged? How do you rebuild trust in medical institutions after professionals have used their knowledge to cause harm rather than healing? The people who hurt those patients are going to jail, Lyra said finally. But fixing what they broke is going to take longer. That evening, they returned to their new apartment in a quiet suburb 40 miles from Hillcrest. The compensation fund had provided enough money for a fresh start, and Lyra had used it carefully. New school for Sophia, therapy for both of them, a small emergency fund that meant she'd never again have to choose between financial security and moral principles. She'd also enrolled in a paralegal program, drawn to advocacy work that felt like a natural extension of what she'd done at Hillcrest. There were other families dealing with missing loved ones, other institutions that needed oversight, other secrets that required someone willing to ask uncomfortable questions. Sophia did her homework at the kitchen table while Lyra prepared dinner, their routine carefully normal despite everything that had changed. Sophia's grades had improved once she'd stopped worrying about eviction notices and her mother's exhaustion. She'd made friends at her new school, joined the science club, started talking about becoming a doctor to help people the right way. After Sophia went to bed, Lyra sat on her apartment's small balcony, looking out at suburban streets that felt peaceful in ways she was still learning to trust. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas Wright. 6-month checkup went well. Memory improving. Wanted to thank you again for not giving up. She'd received dozens of similar messages from survivors and their families. People expressing gratitude she wasn't sure she deserved, crediting her with saving lives when she'd mostly just stumbled into truth by accident. The real heroes were people like Dr. Park, who'd risked everything to save the victims once they understood what was happening. Or Jake Morrison, who'd worked undercover for months to gather evidence while watching people suffer. But maybe heroism wasn't about deserving credit. Maybe it was about recognizing when something was wrong and choosing to act despite the risks. About refusing to let normal become complicit. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw Agent Collins holding a manila folder that looked ominously familiar. "Sorry to bother you so late," Collins said when Lyra opened the door. "But we've received reports about another facility. Similar setup, different state. The Justice Department is putting together an investigation task force." Lyra looked back toward Sophia's bedroom, where her daughter slept peacefully for the first time in months. They'd built a good life here, safe and stable and free from the nightmares that had defined their past year. "I'm not asking you to go undercover again," Collins continued, "but we need someone who understands how these operations work, who can recognize the signs others might miss. Consulting work, mostly. Reviewing evidence, advising investigators. More families are going through what we went through? Potentially. The Hillcrest model was too profitable to be unique. Meridian had connections to at least 6 other research facilities, and shutting down one operation doesn't necessarily stop the others." Lyra thought about Thomas Wright's text message, about the families still searching for missing loved ones, about the victims who might be waiting in basement laboratories for someone to stumble across their suffering. She thought about Sophia, who'd started having nightmares again after today's hearing but had still insisted on attending because someone has to speak for the people who can't speak for themselves. When do you need an answer? Take your time. This work. It changes you. Make sure you're ready for what it costs. After Collins left, Lyra returned to her balcony and called Jake Morrison. He'd taken a position with a victims advocacy organization, helping families navigate the complex legal and psychological aftermath of institutional abuse. "You saw the news about the congressional hearing?" she asked when he answered. "Watched the whole thing. You did good, Thompson. Really good." Collins was just here. "There's another facility." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "You thinking about getting involved?" "I'm thinking about all the people who might be waiting for someone to find them. People like Thomas, like Maria Santos, like all the others. It's not your responsibility to save everyone. No, but it's my responsibility to help when I can." Sophia appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Mama? Who were you talking to?" "Just a friend, sweetheart. Go back to bed." Sophia padded over to the balcony door, studying her mother's face with the perception that had only grown sharper since their ordeal. "Are you thinking about helping more sick people?" The question caught Lyra off guard. "How did you know that?" "Because you get that look when you're thinking about doing something brave and scary." Sophia leaned against the doorframe. "The same look you had when you went down to the basement at the hospital." Lyra pulled her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood resilience. "What do you think I should do?" "I think you should help them," Sophia said without hesitation. "Because that's what good people do. They help when other people are scared." Later that night, after Sophia had returned to bed, Lyra sat at her kitchen table and opened the folder Collins had left. Photographs of another facility, another set of unexplained disappearances, another community where people vanished into systems designed to make them disappear. She thought about the cost of involvement, the danger, the stress, the way this work changed how you saw the world. But she also thought about the cost of turning away, of choosing safety while others suffered in hidden places. By morning, she'd made her decision. There were people waiting in the dark for someone to find them, and Lyra Thompson had learned she was someone who couldn't stop looking until they were found. The work would be dangerous. It would be difficult. It would mean carefully balancing Sophia's needs with the demands of seeking justice for people whose families had given up hope. But hope, she'd learned, was sometimes the most radical act of all. And in a world where institutions could corrupt healing into harm, someone had to keep asking the uncomfortable questions that powerful people preferred to leave unasked. She picked up her phone and called Agent Collins. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.